Hello and welcome to Punk Rock Academic, the podcast where the rebellious spirit of punk rock meets the halls of higher education. We dive into the stories of those who break the mold, challenge the status quo, and bring the DIY ethos to academia. I'm Alex Yore, and with me as always is Dallas McCulloch, your guide through the intersection of anarchy and academics. Get ready to meet the professors, scholars, and students who are as hardcore about their studies as they are about their music. Let's turn up the volume and tear down the walls of convention. This is Punk Rock Academic. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Punk Rock Academic. We're in for a real treat this time. We have with us Michael Bishop, PhD. Now, Michael came up in the 1980s punk scene of the Richmond, Virginia area. In his 30s, he enrolled in community college and worked his way all the way up to a PhD in Critical and Comparative Studies from the music department at University of Virginia. His dissertation was entitled A Socioesthetics of Punk, Theorizing Personal Narrative, History, and Place. He currently works as a content specialist and UX writer for Interfolio, which makes a variety of management software aimed at academic institutions. He is, of course, best known for his roles as Blothar the Berserker and Beefcake the Mighty in the, shall we say, seminal punk band GWAR. Hailing from the deepest reaches of outer space, GWAR are the epitome of shock rock bands, blending elaborate costumes and props with a deep mythos and irreverent humor. They have appeared in movies, talk shows, video games, and have played more shows around the world than this puny human can even comprehend. Michael Bishop, as Beefcake the Mighty, was the bass player and principal songwriter for the band of their first 4 albums. He later rejoined the band as lead singer Blothar the Berserker back in 2014, a position he still holds. And I hope you're all as pumped about this episode as I am. Let's get into it.
Cool. So you are Dr. Michael Bishop, PhD, correct?
Yeah.
If I search you on Google or IMDb, what are you more known for? What?
Well, I'm more known as Blothar the Berserker or Beefcake the Mighty at one time, as a bass player and a singer for GWAR.
So you played on, was it the first 4 full-length GWAR albums as Beefcake?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
And then we're out for some time and then back for a while in the 90s and then...
Yep, that's right. I came back in maybe 98, 99. I came back to play and recorded another record, the record We Kill Everything, and did a little bit of the touring for that. In the meantime, I had another band that I traveled with a lot.
What band was that?
I was in a band called Keep On that was on Touch and Go Records from Chicago.
That's awesome. And then for the last, 10 years, you have been Blothar the Berserker, correct? Or about 10 years now?
Yep, 10 years.
And that's 2 or 3 albums?
2 albums. It's weird. 2 albums, but that's 3 years longer than I was Beefcake.
Yeah, which is wild, but yeah. I guess you got more gusto when you're 20 versus being a middle-aged man. People are balancing more shit, It's
Yeah. I think, the pandemic slowed us down a little bit, but we can't blame it all on that.
Right. Yeah, but nothing can kill GWAR. We obviously know that.
Right.
So just curious, so what was your kind of introduction to music just in general?
Church. I was I was raised in a sort of very conservative church. The Church of Christ is what it was called, and that was in Hopewell, Virginia, which is a small town southeast of Richmond, Virginia. And my family, that was sort of the center of their lives, really. So that's where I was kind of a show-off kid, so they got me to lead songs, and I learned about music doing that. And I also they groomed me to preach as well. So I did some sermons when I was a kid, but and that was sort of my first performance reel in front of a big group of people.
Just singing choir, gospel,
Yeah, not choir, but I would lead songs they don't use instruments in the church or anything, so it's all congregational singing. I would lead. They taught us how to lead. Basically, it was like conducting skills, right? and sight singing and stuff like that. And
so then from there, what was your introduction to punk and metal and hardcore? Just something that's the opposite of the Southern conservative
right,
church.
exactly. Well, at some point you get interested in well, what about the dinosaurs, right? You start asking questions. And I asked a lot of questions, and I wound up asking too many questions, I think. And then I started smoking weed and and listening to Judas Priest. I started on metal, and eventually it's really funny because I actually wrote about this a little bit. The kind of conversion narratives is what I call them to punk rock, right? And everybody has, or not everybody, but most of the people that I've spoken with has this kind of moment when they realize that they liked this kind of music, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because it oftentimes is, the first time that you would hear it, in my case, it was the Sex Pistols, right? I was watching Night Flight, man. And that show that came on, it came on in the early days of cable. It was, when you had the little boxes on the top of the TV. Mm-hmm. And I found, I was watching it, and the Sex Pistols came on. And actually I had seen them before. I had seen them when they first came to the U.S. They came and they were on Walter Cronkite talking about the Sex Pistols,
CBS News.
Yeah. One day this, it's is this going to be something that American kids and I remember my cousin, who I had a sort of healthy competition with. He was like, "This isn't music, this is crap." And for some reason, when he asked me what my favorite band was, at some later point, I was like, the Sex Pistols. And I had never heard them. I didn't know what they sounded like. I just knew that he hated them. So I attached myself to it. And then, it being the 80s, you can't find out about anything. I went to the freaking, to the library to look up what punk rock was, they had a bookmobile, it was like a moving library. And I remember going there and checking out a book on punk and a book on reggae, and looking at those two things and seeing a picture of the Clash in the book on reggae, and saying to myself, yeah, that's me. That's what I'm going to be. That's what I'm going to dress like. So, and then I saw them on Night Flight. I saw the Sex Pistols, and I was like, wow, it sort of changed me. I just really identified with it.
I think a good thing on the Sex Pistols too is if you want to get their entire discography, you only need one album. So that's so much easier. You can't talk about the old stuff or the new stuff. There's just never mind the Bullocks. Yeah. And so was that was after Judas Priest?
Yeah, that was my first
Screaming for Vengeance was playing on the radio, and it changed the world.
Yeah, and Kiss. I really liked Kiss when I was a little kid, and and those were sort of the things that I like. It was the Saturday night, Sunday morning thing, right? I was still going to church and being a good kid, but I liked this other stuff, and then at some point I kind of just fell away, as they would say in the church.
Honestly, that makes a lot of sense too. I guess musically, when I think of GWAR, obviously started out more that kind of shitty punk rock sort of feel, Scumdogs there, and then later it gets way more that technical thrashy metal sort of thing. So it's Judas Priest and the Sex Pistols makes a whole lot of sense as being influences, because I hear both of that in there for sure.
Yeah, and in the case of GWAR, another one though. Probably what made me more interested in GWAR is, so in the early days of punk, how the comics, little comics were very important, right? Like Baboon Dooley was one, and these were just little sort of, we had a music rag in our town called Throttle. There were local cartoonists would put their work in there. So I knew who the guy who was the lead singer for GWAR before me, Dave Brocky. I knew his art from the comics, and Hunter Jackson also had a comic in there. And those are the two guys that started GWAR. And I was sort of more into, I really loved Devo. I liked the theatrical elements of, Devo was a band that had was an idea, it was an idea, and they were so committed to it that even though they all knew how to play bass and drums, right? Like by their third record, they're all playing keyboards. It was just so cool, such dedication to this concept. And, really one of the greatest sort of pranks of all time is Devo, in my opinion, like just fearless. And GWAR kind of presented, that we never thought of GWAR as a metal band, like ever. It was always punk to us. And the people that were involved were people that played punk. The people that played metal in Richmond, it was like, those were that band Firehouse, like, Ragdoll was another one. These are bands that were like Motley Crue and stuff like that.
Right.
So we didn't think much of that. We were coming out of hardcore, man. Like we were playing it in the same places. And even after the first record came out, that's what we plugged into. We were touring, playing where Black Flag played and where the Dead Kennedys played and the Circle Jerks and DRI and all that stuff. That's what we were doing.
Definitely a DRI. I can certainly hear that. Like Cro-Mags especially, like kind of that crossover, where it's seems like there's definitely pulling some influence from there. But so I'm curious, what was your first time going to an actual show?
So I didn't have a license. And Hopewell's about 40 minutes from Richmond, Virginia. And when I was 15 or so, or maybe 16, I remember we went to see GBH. And it was at a place called PB Kelly's in Richmond, which is where the first GWAR show wound up being.
Oh, wow.
We went there, and it was raining, and all of the people were standing outside of the club. It was a very small club. And they were, we'd never seen, we were punks in Hopewell where there weren't any punks. So we'd never even seen other people that liked this music, and they were really, we were scared of them. We stayed in the car and we watched them. We were parked in the parking lot. We were just watching them like go by, and I think we might have been smoking.
What year do you think this was?
85, maybe.
So GBH had been a band for quite some time out of England at that point. So it was, they were pretty established, and you were 15-year-old kids from the 30s, scared shitless.
Yeah, we were. And, because everybody had their nails up and, their mohawks going, and they were all people we didn't know. So, and we were very self-conscious about being, little kind of, we felt like bumpkins for sure. We left without going in. Like we never went in. We just stayed in the car. And then we went to a local show, right? And it was a matinee. Mm-hmm. And that felt a little more welcoming. And it was at the same place. And that's where we first started sort of interacting with and I say I had a band. I had my friends in Hopewell, we had formed this band called The Guilty. It was like it was a hardcore band, so we became friends with the kids up there and started playing music. It was really interesting. A great time for sure.
Being from Virginia, were you shaped by that whole like kind of Minor Threat, DC, Discord Records sort of hardcore scene, or did that not quite make it that far down?
No, it definitely, it was, shaped by like, what was it? The Clash said, "He who fucks nuns will later join the church," right? It's like, we didn't like them. But they were, because they were straight edge and they were, right. And we just kind of had this reaction to them. But yeah, that we knew what Minor Threat was, and we bought the records. Yeah, in a way, for sure, because I did some research on this too, or not really research. I remember being in school and telling people that were writing about music, like about how the records were more affordable if they were by bands from the US, right? Like, for one thing, they came in the shrink wrap, right? Or whatever, or they didn't have shrink wrap. They weren't in the fancy, like, plastic that you'd get when you
Vinyl
bought
sleeves.
imports. The imports were fucking expensive, man. And you could buy a punk rock record for $4. That was a Discord record. So as much as we sort of hated on Discord,
right.
We were buying their records,
Yeah. Doesn't mean that like guilty of being white doesn't rule or filler doesn't rule. It's that I don't want to fucking hang out with those guys though. Like,
yeah, exactly.
they're not going to party with us in the parking lot.
Well, we were jealous, and we were also like, I mean, it was definitely a huge influence on everything from the art to the just the whole thing. It was an influence on us for sure.
From that band, you went into GWAR after that point, or what?
Yeah. I was in high school.
So how old were you when you started GWAR?
I think I had just turned 18.
Mm-hmm. So just fresh out of high school, sort of thing.
Yeah. I was still in high school. My whole senior year, I was in GWAR, and then it was the summer of my senior, or after my senior year, the summer I graduated, that we recorded that record.
Hello was the first one?
Yep.
Okay, so they had been around kind of as a smaller, more informal thing, but then you joined it, kind of kicked into that next gear of having a proper release. And it was an art school project, man. I mean, it was like the band would do it was sort of like such a production at the time, and everything was paper mache, right? Like, so nothing lasted, right? Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of very temporary, anything that the band did. So there had been like maybe 4 shows before I joined. And each time, like, everything would get destroyed and then they'd make it all again. And it took a while.
It was largely University of Virginia art students?
Well, University of Virginia was in Charlottesville. So this was Virginia Commonwealth University.
Okay, VCU, yep.
Yeah, VCU.
And then, so you got out of high school and basically you guys just started touring, or they had to drop out of school to tour, or toured around their college schedule, or how did that operate?
Well, they were older than me, and most of them had finished school. So, including Brocky, Brocky graduated, the singer, and most of them came out of the sculpture department at VCU, or painting and printmaking. And yeah, I mean, they had all sort of come through and were already out. Some of them were teachers at that point. Dave Muscle taught down there, and I think maybe Spike Delaney, who was in the band, was also like, I mean, you didn't have to have a PhD or anything. They were just sort of like helping people in the sculpture department and stuff like that.
So you mentioned joining GWAR while you were a student and kind of already being introduced to metal and punk rock. Like what kind of student were you? Like while you were in high school, was it like this rock and roll shit is a side gig and I need to focus on my studies, or more like I'm living the fucking life and don't give a shit about school?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't care about school at all. I hated it. I barely graduated. I was into theater and stuff like that, and I probably, if I hadn't have gotten in GWAR, I mean, I think that I was heading for like, theater major type thing. And I was singing in plays and doing stuff like that. And so I was doing musical theater.
I mean, what is musical theater? It's not singing, It's musical theater. We're really into the Cro-Mags and DRI,
Right. It's pretty much the same thing.
So you guys started touring obviously pretty heavy after it was Hello, and then Scumdogs was kind of the big breakthrough album, right? That was a couple of years afterwards. Yeah,
we had been touring, did all the touring for the first record, and we wound up going to England and doing some stuff and met these guys actually in the band Bad Manners, that ska band. Okay. But we met Buster, and Buster said he wanted to put out a GWAR record. And so Bad Manners actually, or Buster Blood Vessel, his label Master Records is that's who we recorded Scumdogs for. But then, and they gave us some money to do it, which we thought was a big deal. And they also did it without, like, we weren't under an obligation, right? It was just like a one-off, and that's why we did it. Because at the time, everybody was, obviously, like, it was the time when punk had kind of started to cross over a little bit, and there was definitely some like record labels that were sniffing around and trying to, sign bands and stuff like that. And there was a lot of mistrust about it. So we wound up hanging with, and not wanting to mess with that. So we wound up going with a British record company. Yeah. And then later the record got licensed to Metal Blade.
Right. We've been putting out, obviously a ton of metal and hardcore albums for years at that point. Yeah. I had absolutely no idea what the Bad Manners connection. I love two-tone. That's my scene. That's wild. So after Scumdogs came out, that was when you wound up. Obviously, you had did quite well. I remember you guys were on Joan Rivers. That was you and Brocky, right?
Yeah.
Which was a major fucking talk show seen by tens of millions of people at that point. Empire Records was not too terrible. It was a few years after that, but kind of getting some Beavis and Butthead. Obviously, it was the whole video game. The premise: Alex and I, 30 years ago in our basement, playing Beavis and Butthead, trying to get the GWAR tickets. Like that's so. I guess how much did that change the dynamic? You start getting a bus, start touring constantly, just really hitting it hard.
That was a great time period for the band, and it's funny because we still were touring. When I left the band after the fourth record, GWAR was still it was a big band in the sense of there were a lot of people. There were 14 of us, right? And I know. and it's because we carried people who made the props and costumes, and people who dressed up and performed, and so we didn't really have a crew. We just had these 14 guys and girls, and we were still in a school bus. I think we went through 3 different school buses that we would travel around in. Up until through the fourth album. When I first quit, which was in 92, we were still in a school bus. So the band was on an upward trajectory, but it was weird because we'd play at the Ritz with Danzig, right, and park out front in this freaking school bus. So we sold out the Palladium in LA.
Yeah.
And parked in front of it in a freaking school bus.
You're right. That sounds punk as fuck. If it's punk or not, this is Buster Blood Vessels putting out your albums. You're touring in a fucking school bus out the Palladium. That sounds pretty punk.
Yeah, GWAR's a punk band.
For sure. No so when you had quit at that point, at some point you wound up going to community college in Virginia, right?
Yep.
What was the timeline on that? What kind of led you to that decision to go back to school?
I had been doing Keep On, which was the band after GWAR, and we had been touring a lot. We'd been, doing pretty well, but it got to the point where I got married, and I was like, I just kind of thought to myself, well, this is where this stops, right? And I need to start doing other stuff. And I didn't have any skills or any way to really get a job that was doing anything except driving. And I knew I shouldn't just be driving for a living. I felt like I needed to do something else. And so I went to community college and tried to get a degree because nobody would hire me. I was a writer, and I had been writing for a long time, but nobody would really give me a chance to do that without any kind of degree at all, Mm-hmm. So, that's why I went to school. When I was there, I discovered that I really liked teaching writing, and it was the downtown campus of J. Sargent Reynolds Community College, which is in downtown Richmond. Okay. And that made a difference, right? Because the people that I was teaching, they were mostly adults. It was mostly people that were working on a menu and they couldn't write the proposal, but they'd been a cook at the I remember this one guy that I helped write a menu proposal, because he was a great cook and he was getting left behind. And it seemed to me like it was kind of like punk. It was like, all right, well, feels like you're doing some good in some way, to help these people. And I think it made a big difference that it was mostly working class people downtown, nurses and emergency, technicians or whatever, and cooks and stuff like that. It wasn't like a bunch of just college kids. And I liked it. I liked it a lot. I liked the teaching aspect. And, so I transferred from J. Sargent Reynolds to the University of Virginia when I had the credits that would do it. It was a big deal. I mean, when I got there, I still did really well. I just, school was easy at that point. Like, you're older, you've got experience, you're not, drinking all the time. You're just doing school.
And if you're paying for it yourself and it's your ass on the line.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was my case. I mean, I definitely was motivated to get through and finish. And then while I was there, I took a music class that was on Elvis, and I wrote about Elvis. I loved the class. I just loved it. And I wrote this piece on Elvis or on my family and their involvement with Elvis. And it kind of made its way around the music department at UVA. And then they asked me if I might want to, come on and be a grad student there.
Were they aware of you being like a touring musician from GWAR, or was it just like, this is a cool thing a guy wrote?
Yeah, they didn't know about GWAR until I started talking to them about it and telling them.
So you got the bachelor's in English from there, and then did like a kind of PhD, MA sort of hybrid program, or?
I got my bachelor's from. Geez, listen to that. She is just screaming. That's punk rock.
Right. She sounds like Susie Sue there.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it was. I had. I got my bachelor's. Really, I focused on American studies at UVA, but it was in the English department. And then I came out of that and wound up going to the music department and getting a PhD.
How old were you when you had gotten the bachelor's?
I was probably 33, something like that.
We're the same. We were in our 30s getting ours after touring. So, very relatable. I mean, I'm pretty much on all of this. And then the PhD, that was a bit of a process. Was it 2012 when you were finished on that finally? Or? Yeah.
I was, I kind of dragged it out.
Well, you had a wife and kids and stuff, right? Like you're...
Yeah. And, but I was also, hiding from work in a way, I think. Just doing, that
sounds punk rock right there for sure. How can I prolong real life?
Yeah, exactly. And, so I just sort of tried to do what I could. And I wound up teaching a lot. Mm-hmm. I taught, and you can sort of trick yourself into believing that, you're working, right? Even though you're in school, and I was working. I mean, I taught 12 credits. I was teaching a lot. Yeah, I never taught, except for when I first started, I would only teach like maybe 3 credits, but then pretty soon I started teaching a whole bunch of classes, and I was teaching in the English department as well. And actually most of my experience teaching was in the English department, because in the music department, I taught like sort of, appreciation classes and history of jazz and history of gospel and lots of music history courses. But really teaching about writing is what I wanted to do. So.
Did you have some moments with students, like maybe a kid shows up with a mohawk or something and, he just knows, it's old Mr. Bishop teaching the class, and then you drop some knowledge on him to blow his mind? Any funny stuff like that?
I mean, they knew who I was in some cases, and it was really weird because, like UVA, it would have been so much of a much bigger deal at VCU. Mm-hmm. UVA, which, sadly is now known for the Charlottesville Nazi incident, but at the time, and even now, UVA is a really conservative school. It was so the kids weren't as much fun as the sort of artsy kids at VCU. But I remember that when they would ask me about it, it would almost always be like on the last day of class.
Yeah.
The last day of class, and I'm like sitting there, and I'm like, does anybody have any questions? And they'd be like, yeah, aren't you were in GWAR?
Right. If they did day one, they fear you're gonna sacrifice them to Gorgor or something, probably.
I did have a moment like in a summer class that I taught that was on the history of rock, and I brought in one of our videos.
Which video? Meat sandwich? Please tell me.
I can't remember, man. It was something. Right. I was trying to show him something, but what I remember is that fucking an animal was like in the DVD manual, like, or the, like when you start the menu that shows and fucking it, and the kids were like, "What's fucking an animal like?"
Balancing two very different worlds sometimes. Yeah, that's cool. But I'm sure you made the day.
At the zoo, man. What can I say?
Yeah. The three kids in the back that smelled like cigarettes, they were stoked for that day, though, I'm sure.
Yeah. And it was weird too. Like, I mean, I remember teaching the history of rock. It was weird. If you think about it, never mind the Bullocks. Like, it meets all of the. It was a really modern sounding record, right? Yeah. Like when it came out. Like, I mean, it sounded so. Like, it has the language of rock and roll and of metal, even that, like, the kids now, when you play it for them, they're utterly unsurprised at the guitars and the bass and the drums, but his voice still fucks with people, man. Like, as soon as he starts singing, it's like that sort of disinterest in melody, like, really would impact these kids. Like, I could watch that happen. You'd watch them be like, this isn't music, like, because it denies melody. So that was kind of a fun thing about it, was to watch, this guy have that effect on these kids after so many years.
Definitely. I can see Bodies blowing the mind out of some 19-year-old kid where he's got the chorus just saying fuck over and over. Fuck this, fuck that, fuck it all, the fuck you fucking rat. Like,
exactly.
Praising abortion afterwards, like that.
Yeah. I don't want a baby that looks like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So Alex here read some chunks of your dissertation. You got some questions on that there, Alex?
So I'm coming from the sciences. So when I think of my impending dissertation, I'm thinking of all, the research and sort of this methodology of how I'm going to lay this thing out. But yours was a very different approach, and I just hoping you could talk maybe a little bit about that process for you, because you bring up some pretty like painful childhood memories and some of the struggles that you went through in those early days, and then the formation of the band and different things like that. So you could kind of maybe walk us a little bit through that process of writing your dissertation, because you've essentially been doing your research, for 30 years for over 30 years at that point.
Yeah, me search, I guess.
Yeah, me search.
It was. I mean, it's obviously, music. I mean, at some point I was like, they just stuck an ology on the end of the word music. Like, this isn't a fucking science. I mean, it's like, it's science in the way that political science is a science, right? And the objectivity of it started to seem ridiculous to me. Like, this sort of pretend objectivity, like just the idea of taking this voice of authority that's nothing but performance, man. It's just, it's bullshit. People experience things subjectively. So when I met someone at UVA who had this idea, it was this teacher, Michelle Kisliuk, and she was like, look, I want to talk about, the object subjectively conceived. That's what she would say. And she had this idea of socioesthetics. And I probably, what I wound up with is something that would be, I think it's a stretch really to call it a dissertation, right? But because it is an experiment, right? It's like, I'm just going to sort of try to write about something and write through this, what could be interpreted as a pretty solipsistic lens, right? Like, it's like just sort of looking at things very subjectively and writing about yourself in that moment. And each chapter of it, like a lot of dissertations, it's sort of a gesture towards something that would be something, right? Like, so it's me looking at this set of experiences and looking at punk rock. My regrets about it are that I don't get into the subject of the thing nearly as much as I would like to, and partly that's because I was, that's what she wanted. I mean, that's what her idea was, right? Was it like you're supposed to write? It's sort of like, I mean, I guess you could see the influence of it. There's like a sentence in even books in the sciences, right, where they sort of position themselves in the narrative a little bit. And then, so you have some idea of who they are, and it's just a gesture, right? She's more like into performance studies. So she really encouraged me to sort of have it be performative in some way. And I mean, it gets really, really personal and really, and that's been always been sort of my take on punk rock, like, which is different. I remember giving Biafra because I was such a fan. I mean, like Keepone, the name of my band. Yeah, Keepone was a chemical it was a pesticide that was, I mean, we talked about getting into punk rock, right? Like, I definitely felt hailed by the Dead Kennedys and by that song in particular, right? Because my family had worked at Allied Signal, like, my uncles, my grandfather, we knew about this, I mean, that was the reason that we stopped being able to fish in the James River, like, and the Appomattox River. Like, we couldn't, I mean, I grew up having these big fish fries and doing all this stuff, and this environmental disaster happened, right there. And so to have somebody from San Francisco calling out this thing, right? It meant a lot to me personally. And it was so disappointing in a way when I met Biafra and talked to him about it. Like, he didn't know nearly as much about it as I sort of hoped he did, but he did know enough. I mean, he hollered about it, and that meant a lot. I don't even know why I went down that road, except to say that, like, for me, punk was always very personal in the way that I interpret it. But I think I remember I mentioned Biafra because when he saw my lyrics, like, he put one of the Keepone records out.
Alternative Tentacles?
Yeah. Awesome. And when he saw that, the lyrics, he was like, these are very abstract, and very sort of personal. I think he was expecting it to be a little more like, distanced and political or something like that.
So how have, I guess, kind of your experiences or, being influenced by people like Jello Biafra, of course, I mean, we're big Dead Kennedys fans. Like, how does that shape you as an academic at this point? Like the DIY shows you go to, like, just really growing up in that sort of scene. How does that influence you as a 50-year-old doctorate having professional family man?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I just still think of myself as a punk rocker. I think that a lot of people my age do. I'm comfortable with the label, even though I know that I don't look the part, but I feel that way. I feel connected to the music, and I think that punk period, it shaped everything about me. I mean, my growing up and being a part of GWAR and playing music professionally, I mean, everything was shaped by this music and by this sort of pursuit, which really, sort of professionally avocational, right? Like punk rock. I mean, there was never, I mean, that's a big difference in the Sex Pistols and the Clash and American hardcore, right? Is that there was no pretense to the commercialism of hardcore. I mean, you weren't going to make a lot of money in a band called the Butthole Surfers, right? But they tried to, which is the weird thing, right? And they actually, yeah, they did. I mean, like, so it was sort of, that's an interesting thing, right? That kind of contrast or conflict in some way, and GWAR, I mean, definitely falls into that too, right? It's like, I mean, at some point we started trying to make money with this thing. And, to some degree, I think that's because you get older and it's like, well, I'm not going to be riding in this freaking school bus anymore and sleeping on the floor in this guy's house. My hips hurt, it's like, so,
Yeah.
so you kind of have to. But I mean, as far as an academic, I mean, like that sort of, taking it personally, thinking about it, thinking about the, looking at things and thinking about things. It's sort of a position or a disposition on the world, like a lens on the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that has stayed with me. And it's still there. I don't teach anymore. Like all I do really is GWAR and write and try to, I mean, I do a lot of creative writing and, I mean, in GWAR, we're lucky because we get to write, you can write a lot of things. I mean, the band has comic books and we have films and stuff like that. And there's a lot of things to be done. And I even enjoy the business side of it now. Like I enjoy trying to, sometimes I think of punk as a practice too, right? Like it's like a way of being that you can carry into the things that you do in the world. And I know it's very abstract, but it means to me, right? Like,
it's ethos. It's a framework of Joe Strummer had some good fucking ideas and I can apply that to anything.
Yep.
For
sure.
All right. Yeah. So wrapping it up. So the first one, Desert Island album or albums. You get a couple albums, you can take Desert Island. That's all you get. What do you take?
Wow.
We do leave a record player too. It's a cool island.
Yeah, right. I might have to say one of them, ironically enough, would probably be, even though I would get sick of it really quick. I'm going to say Fresh Fruit.
Rotting Vegetables. Oh yeah.
Yeah, My War maybe.
Black Flag, good option.
And Zen Arcade.
Who's Zen Arcade? I feel like a poser now.
Who's to do?
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
I might check out My War. I might replace My War with Double Nickels on the Dime.
Minuteman.
Minuteman.
There we go. Because you said something on Touch and Go, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And let's see. Oh, what's the last thing you listened to? Last album, last song?
Kids Bop. No.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. Seriously, it's. Oh wow! The last thing I listened to was Dub Syndicate, a Dub Syndicate song by the Twinkle Brothers and the Tribunia Band, which is a band from. I mean, I was an ethnomusicologist. I mean, you got to give me a break. The Tribunia is like a Polish sort of mountain gypsy type, and they had done a dub reggae song with the Twinkle Brothers, and I was listening to it in particular for a melody that they have in the song that I really liked and was thinking about using as an influence on something.
That is as weird of an answer as I was kind of expecting, based on your credentials.
So for our last question, what's a band that's you think is just criminally underrated? And this could be past or present or future if you want to go that route.
Wow, future band. Future.
They're gonna be so criminally underrated.
I think that honestly, man, I mean, selfishly, I think that GWAR is pretty underrated musically. I think maybe I just know too much about it.
Well, you think people just focus on the theatrics and the whole what is GWAR? Not just like this is just a badass like hardcore punk band. Yeah,
I mean they I think that people miss a lot of what is there with GWAR, and they it sort of gets reframed as. It's interesting. I mean, like I actually think that Dave's voice continues to do that work that Lydon's voice was doing, right? Like sort of being it's interesting to me that people can't conceive the way GWAR, I think, is different than a lot of shock rock bands, because GWAR's left out of that conversation. And that's a big thing. Like GWAR is left out. Let me say that again for how much this fucking makes sense. GWAR is left out of the conversations on shock rock.
Right.
Left out of the tours, left out of the fucking books, right? Because the band is funny.
Yeah.
Because he's funny.
You're self-aware.
Humor makes it fucking dismissible.
Yeah.
And that's the stupidest fucking thing that I have ever heard, right? Like, you know, how you can look at, you know, if you ask the people, if you ask Corey Taylor, he'll tell you where it comes from. If you ask fucking Rob Zombie, he'll tell you where it comes from.
Right.
But, you know, not at a Danny Wimmer festival, right? It's like, you know, this is not, so it's that fucking sucks.
Just Slipknot's not funny. White Zombie is not funny, but doing a lot of the same shit and after you guys. So
yeah. But you know, I mean, so that kind of sucks, but I don't know, I guess, you know, my real answer that's not me would probably be, I'm the most criminally underrated. I think
Fuckers know.
No, you got to understand that when I say that, like, GWAR is such a big thing that I feel like a very small part of it, to be honest with you. I'm more speaking for my friends, and that's what the band is. It's a bunch of guys that I really think of as my buddies. And, you know, I think that the Minutemen are undersold a lot. Nobody really knows who they are, and they were a hugely important band.
I mean, if Double Nickels on the Dime are one of your albums on the Desert Island, clearly it's got to be up there for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I really do.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, I think that's all we got for you here. So it's been a pleasure talking to you. So
thanks for being here.
Yeah. No problem, man. Thank you.
I think 7-year-old or whatever, probably let's go 12-year-old us right now that we're hanging out in my basement listening to fucking GWAR, drinking Mountain Dew or probably Faygo. We're from Michigan.
Faygo,
playing fucking Super Nintendo would be shitting a brick right now. We're talking to Beefcake, the Mighties. So
37-year-old me is still shitting a brick. That's
cool. Right on, brother. So
all right.
Cool.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Punk Rock Academic. We hope you're as inspired as we are by the incredible stories from the punk rockers revolutionizing higher education. If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow rebels. Stay tuned for more tales of academic anarchy and keep the DIY spirit alive. Until next time, keep rocking and never stop learning.